Marcus Kolga. He is the founder of Disinfo Watch, an organization that tracks disinformation from both foreign and domestic sources. Marcus's work has angered the Kremlin so much that he is on Russia's official sanction list. A list that is growing. Marcus, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Molly. And I'll add that I'm also on China's sanctions list now.
Okay, so a double whammy there. Marcus, how successful, when we talk about Russia specifically, have they been in shaping global opinion around disinformation?
Well, had you asked me maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, I'd say that they were doing a pretty good job. That they were gaining. I would say now after the past 5-6 weeks of the new Trump administration, I'd have to say quite bluntly that the Kremlin is clearly winning the war against Western democracy. Unfortunately,
they are winning the war.
Yeah,
those are strong words.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the ultimate goal of any foreign authoritarian information and influence operations, and certainly the Kremlin's, is to ultimately impact policy-making decisions and government policy, especially foreign policy as it relates to Russia. And Russia certainly, since 2014 and more intensely after their full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that objective has been to grind down morale inside Ukraine, to break down Western support for Ukraine, and to have Western governments basically repeat some of the disinformation that, if not all of the disinformation that's being produced by Russia about Ukraine. And it's really deeply concerning, in fact, shocking, to hear the U.S. administration and in fact, the President of the United States himself directly repeating some of those disinformation narratives about Ukraine, and to see Donald Trump basically adopting many of the positions that Vladimir Putin has been advocating for without the Western world, without the United States, and without Ukraine getting anything in return. So, certainly in terms of the United States, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and the Western democratic world, we are right now losing this battle against the Kremlin.
I think we were all flabbergasted when we watched the heated exchange in the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump. Let's take a look at that right now.
We gave you military equipment, and you men are brave, but they had to use our military.
Yes. What about
if you didn't have our military equipment, if you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days.
Marcus, I have never seen an exchange like that coming out of the White House. How did the Russians use that to their advantage?
Well, look, I mean, it was abhorrent. It was grotesque. I don't think anyone in the world has ever seen a national leader, never mind the self-proclaimed leader of the free world, treating another leader like that, basically flipping around the narratives, blaming him and his country for starting a war that was clearly started by Russia. So if I were in the Kremlin seeing this happen, I would have been overjoyed. I think that exchange and the outcome of that meeting, now we're hearing that the flow of U.S. weapons to Ukraine has been essentially put on pause, if not terminated indefinitely. I would be overjoyed. This exceeds any of the Kremlin's or Vladimir Putin's wildest dreams. And I'm sure that on Friday night, after this meeting, the champagne corks were popping all over Moscow.
Wow. Yeah, just an incredible exchange. I want to go back to the tactics that Russia is not only known for, but what are the new ones? Because I see influencers out there pushing certain information, and it makes me wonder, what is this all about? Where is this coming from?
What the Kremlin has been working on over the past, I would say, decade or even more, is to find influencers. These are individuals and even organizations in the Western world, including right here in Canada, in the United States, who might act as sort of conduits for Russian information operations, basically taking in some of these narratives, washing away the Kremlin's fingerprints off of them, and then reintroducing them into our information space. And most those Canadians who are exposed to these narratives may not even be aware that they are consuming information from a Russian influence campaign. And we saw, a smoking gun version of this just this past September, when the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed an indictment against 2 employees of RT, who were accused of basically taking $10 million US and finding 2 individuals. Apparently, they are Canadians, and alleging that these 2 Canadians set up a company, this new media platform, brought in a number of American and even a Canadian influencer to produce content that was directed by the 2 employees of RT. This information, the content, usually in the form of videos and podcasts, was then broadcast out to millions of individuals in North America, both Americans and Canadians. And a lot of this content actually focused. It was a lot of anti-Canadian content, suggesting that Canada was a decaying nation. Lots of content attacking the government, also a lot of anti-Ukrainian content. And so we know that, again, RT spent $10 million on this operation. And again, millions and millions of North Americans viewed this content. So clearly, Russia is spending a lot of money on these operations, but it's also reaching a lot of unsuspecting Canadians and Americans with this, and leading to, I think, the kinds of outcomes that we're seeing today in the United States, unfortunately.
Marcus, we have a federal election on the horizon here. What should people be on the lookout for?
Look, I think there's going to be an intensification of foreign information operations targeting both specific ridings, but also the broader federal campaign. We've seen foreign actors targeting our elections all the way going back to 2015, and there's no reason to believe that they're going to be letting up this time around. So, I think that voters need to be aware that some of the most sensitive issues facing our nation will be targeted, because this is what they do. They target those issues and they try to polarize us and polarize voters. So be on the lookout for anything that sort of triggers an emotion that sounds like it's maybe a bit too partisan, and just keep a general eye out for any sort of potential disinformation.
You told us that Russia is winning this war right now, so it makes me wonder if you are sitting up at night, worried every night about what we are taking in.
Molly, I can't tell you how much stress I'm under. The number of sleepless nights. Sure, we have those tools, but they are clearly not enough. Russia is spending about $1.6 billion annually on these operations. Let that number sink in. We're
$1.6 billion
on propaganda and disinformation operations. We don't spend anywhere nearly close to that. Even if you put in all of the budgets of the European nations and the United States, all of that combined doesn't even come close to matching that. So we need to start taking these sorts of operations far more seriously. We need to start enforcing the laws that we have. And we also need to start coming up with a strategy to disrupt these operations. We're not there yet. We're good at studying them. We're good at having academic institutions look at them, but we're not very good at stopping them, deterring them, and preventing them. So that's something that we need to start looking at in the future. And we need to make sure that those civil society actors that are doing that work have the resources to do them. And for programs like yours, to make sure that more and more Canadians see the work that you're doing, so that they do have the critical thinking resources to understand and detect these sorts of narratives when they see them online.
Marcus, always interesting to talk to you, and such good information. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Molly.